Hey guys, this is Reed Coverdale, and you're watching another episode of The Naturalist Capitalist, and I've got Mike back on the show again. How you doing, Mike?
Doing well.
All right. So there's a ton of turmoil going on right now all over the country. There's riots, there's people burning and looting and people protesting. Um, I think a lot of people kind of have an idea of libertarian principles being what's going on right now. Like they think that it just means total anarchy and that people can do whatever they want. It's whoever has the biggest gun wins. And that's definitely not what we believe. I mean, we believe in the non-aggression principle. We believe in rule of law. We believe in property rights. And all of those things are being violated right now. We also believe in criminal justice reform and, dealing with police brutality. So what do you think about all this? You think it's crazy? Like, what do you think we should be doing? What would be like the right response right now?
Boy, it's hard to justify burning down a Target because of some random incident happened where the officer happened to be white and the victim happened to be black. It seems like there's a lot of racial tension that seems to crop up whenever that situation happens, and it's kind of a mystery to me why it always seems to happen when those two, that scenario seems to pull itself off. So,
Right.
It's hard for me to speak to what the solution is because, obviously there's been a lot of history with, the Black Lives Matter movement and whatnot and Antifa, and, it's hard to know what is real, what is being funded by the Soros Foundation, what has been, how much of this is smokescreen, how much of this is people being paid to riot, how much of this is genuine. This is, it's hard to know for sure just because we don't really know very many facts. I listen to people like Stefan Molyneux to try to get a clear picture of what the hell is going on, sometimes.
Right.
But in terms of what a libertarian society would be like, it's hard to say. Obviously there's some probably going to be differences from what we're used to dealing with right now, but essentially one would speculate that it would be a more peaceful society because people would be a little more free and a little more tolerant with any luck. That's really what the whole idea is about, is really saying, hey, you know what, you and I don't agree on everything, but we're gonna learn to live with each other because that's what life is all about. And that's really what the whole libertarian thing is all about, isn't it?
Right. Yeah, I think obviously what should have been done is I think that cop should have been arrested right away. That was the first mistake. But as far as the way the city reacted, just rioting and making people pay for the consequences who had nothing to do with the crime is just the wrong way to do it. I mean, I think what they should have done, and I'm being serious when I say this, I think, the hundreds of people who took to the streets, I think they should have, with guns maybe, they should have gone to the police station, hundreds of them, and then just stood outside the police station and said, we are not leaving until you arrest that officer and demand justice, and I think the police probably would have done something about it. I don't think going around and burning mom and pop stores and, their Targets and looting, downtown Main Street, I don't think that's the solution. I think they're taking it out on, people who didn't commit the crime. The government is what was responsible for this. So like, hold the government accountable. Don't hold business owners accountable. They didn't they didn't do any of this. You know what I mean?
Well, there's a lot of people who are being caught in a web of uncertainty about, why did they burn down my building? Because this thing happened to a cop. One,
Yeah.
it's difficult to draw the line and say, oh, well, there's rioting in the streets, and it's not because, the Philadelphia Eagles won the Super Bowl. It's because,
Yeah.
I don't know. It just seems like that this seems very antithetical to what a Martin Luther King would have taught, where we say, they're gonna try to, we should be trying to wage a war of peace and trying to be tolerant and turn the other cheek. These are philosophies that I haven't practice in my own life, and it just seems very antithetical to that, to just say, oh, well, there's a crime that happened and it's an injustice, so I'm gonna go fight about it and cause a ruckus. No, it doesn't make much sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah. So we both kind of have similar, I'd say we have very similar views. You and I would probably agree on like over 90% of the issues. I just thought it would be interesting if we kind of outlined what our philosophies are. And then we'll talk later about how we arrived there. But I align with the Libertarian Party probably like 85, 90%. I think that they have good ideals, but some of the ways of arriving there might not be the ways that they say they want to get there. Like, I think there needs to be a little bit of environmental regulation. I don't think if you just deregulate absolutely everything, that everything will just work itself out. And I know people have ideas of property laws and the non-aggression principle applying to pollution. I think that you still need some sort of federal legislation to protect people from pollution. And I think it needs to be federal because you have states that have the same rivers and the same lakes. And, if one guy pollutes something, it can hurt the next guy. And if a state decides they don't care about environmental regulations as much as the next state, it can hurt them just as much. And then I guess I believe in things like campaign finance reform because I think that's a good first step toward getting money out of politics. I think the long-term game would be having less power in politics because then there's no reason for money in politics because people won't need the influence. But I think to move in that direction, we have to have some laws that maybe not all libertarians would be in favor of. I think putting caps on donations and things like that is a good idea. But other than that, I agree with them on pretty much everything: war, criminal justice reform, prison reform, civil liberties, the Patriot Act, pretty much right down the line. So how similar are you to that? Like, how close to the libertarian platform are you?
Yeah, I've pretty much, as you could say, have gone off the deep end with, I've listened to a lot of different folks, and I find myself agreeing with a lot of it. It's hard to pin down because I bounce around a lot. Some days I feel like I'm a minarchist where I'm like, okay, we need to have a small consolidated government and we need to have set powers and, things. And then I'll listen to Fan Molyneux for a while and I'll be like, there's something to this whole ANCAP thing and we should really just go all shebang and have, private governments and, every, it's hard for me to say I don't believe that I know all the answers to our problems. But
No,
that's
right.
the libertarian stance to make. I think of Penn Jillette, who's often said, it's not up to me to know what's best for you. And that's at the heart of what, libertarianism is all about.
Yeah.
I would say, if we want to talk about how my journey to libertarianism began, I was a George Bush Republican, back in the day. Maybe after 9/11 happened, I believed that going to the war with Iraq was a good thing. And, earlier to that, in my more formative years, the first Iraq war happened, and I was all Team USA, and let's go get this Saddam guy, and when the war was over, I was like, disappointed that we didn't actually kill him, and all those things that you play into the hysteria. Granted, I was a kid, so that's my excuse, but it seems to be more evolved. As time grew on and the war waged on, and suddenly I discovered Ron Paul, my views changed a lot. And prior to finding Ron Paul, I actually discovered the word libertarian by listening to an author named Joel Salatin, because I was interested in doing small scale farming projects. And he mentioned it when just offhandedly saying, this is how his philosophy is driving his life. And I started to absorb some of that. And there were other incidents where like I used to watch Fox News, and there was a business show on the weekends, and a couple of the presenters were staunch libertarians. I think of one named Jonathan Hoenig, who was he calls himself the capitalist pig or whatever. I think he wrote a book about it. And they would constantly pitch the show. The show would come on, they'd pitch some kind of a thing, and it would kind of devolve into very, very rudimentary talk. And then someone would come on and say, why is it the government's job to do X? Where do they get the justification of that? And you'd really stop and think about, boy, there's something to that argument. And that was another venue that got me really thinking about, okay, maybe the government does do too much. Maybe they're trying to solve problems that don't need to be solved at the federal level. So that's kind of my take on that. And I've kind of been indoctrinated ever since 2008, when Ron Paul ran for president. And now I've been disgruntled and cynical and hopeful and all these other emotions ever since.
Yeah, I was raised as a Republican. I'm 26 right now, so when the Iraq War happened, I was 9, and my parents were both Republicans. They both voted for George Bush, but we actually went downtown and stood on the side of the road with signs protesting the war. And I think they voted for him in 2004 again. But they were against the Iraq War. They thought it was terrible. My parents were very conservative. They were pro-life. But they since they were pro-life, they believed that war was not a good thing to be frivolous about. So my dad actually went on a talk show, I remember, with a conservative host, and the conservative host had seen us on the side of the road, and he just thought we were a bunch of wacko liberals. So he had my dad come on, and he was shocked to find out that my dad was actually more conservative than he was. But I grew up in that lifestyle, and I started working when I was 16. After school and on the weekends and stuff. And there were just so many dumb regulations that I had to comply with because I wasn't 18. I was working in a lumber yard, and I was allowed to drive a pickup truck for 20 miles with a load full of shingles, but I couldn't use a drill because it's machinery. And I was just like thinking about how dumb that was. And then more and more things, like I couldn't use the chop saw, I couldn't use anything, and I was allowed to drive a pickup truck. And then in high school, I stayed in the trades. I got my CDL, and I worked for the lumber yard for another year or so. And then I started doing power line work, and just seeing all the stupid one size fits all regulations that you had to follow for everything and realizing how much it slowed down work, and how even though some safety rules are important, a lot of these rules did not make you any safer. They were just they just made you comply. I remember I was hooking up a shipping Connex to pick up and put on a trailer. So I was on the roof with a bunch of chains, and this guy came over screaming at me saying, "You need to get off that. You don't have a harness on." And I was like, "Why do I need a harness? I'm in the middle of an 8 by 20 foot, Connex trailer." And he's like, "No, you're more than 4 feet off the ground. You need to have a harness on." So I was allowed to use a step ladder on the corners of the Connex to hook the chains up. So now I'm standing, on this rickety step ladder, hooking these chains up, and I'm complying. I'm no safer. I'm actually in a more dangerous position, but I'm being compliant. And I started realizing that, these laws go beyond work. They're in everything, and how dumb they are. So I was still a Republican at this point. But then I had a few run-ins with the police, not doing anything illegal, just driving. And I got pulled over. And one time I got, taken out of the car, and I had to put my hands on the back of the car. And they held me for like an hour, and I had to answer all these dumb questions. They never told me why they were holding me. And then they just gave me my license and let me go. I had a few run-ins like that. And then I moved out west. I went on a traveling spree, and I worked with a bunch of immigrants in Colorado roofing. And the job was paying pretty decently. Like, you started at like 16, 17, $18 an hour. But like 80% of the workforce was, Latino. And it wasn't because no one, it wasn't that they were stealing the job. It was that no white guys would come and work. Like, we'd see a white guy show up, and we knew he'd be there for 2 days because we were doing hard work, long days. And, it's not like there's this myth that immigrants come and they work for $2 a day, and they undercut all our work. It's just not true. Like, people in this country aren't willing to work. So it kind of started backfiring on a bunch of my conservative ideas I'd had growing up. And then in 2016, when Rand Paul ran, I started really listening to him because he didn't sound like all the other maniacs on the stage with him. Like, all of them were just terrible, and he was just so much more clear-minded. And so he really started putting me on that trajectory. And I was actually listening to some other liberal commentators. Like, I listened to Bill Maher a lot, and the Young Turks, and like people that I really didn't agree with, but I listened to them, and I realized that they were right on some things. But I realized I couldn't go into the Democrat Party. Like, it just wasn't. I agreed with them. I realized I was agreeing with them on some things, but they were just so economically illiterate, I guess. And I'd grown up working. They say if you're not a socialist when you're 20, then you don't have a heart. If you're not a capitalist when you're 30, you don't have a brain. I just went straight to the capitalist phase because there was no college, there was no partying phase. I had to pay for my own car right away, had to pay for my own rent, and I was gaining capital. So it just, that whole economic half never really went to the left. But I did realize the fallacies of the conservative side when it comes to civil liberties and immigration and, things like drug laws and gay marriage, things like that. I just realized, no, I really believe in freedom. You know what I mean? It was an interesting journey.
Right.
So
The question of whether or not you own your person and you're really able to make your own decision.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and what I realized was that the Democrats really don't believe in that. I thought that the Democrats really were for civil liberties, were anti-war, were for immigrants, were for the working man. Like, when I started looking into, Democrats and progressives being for the working man, I realized that even though that's what they say, their policies actually just hurt the working man. And I know because I am a working man, and I've seen those policies in action. The more rules and regulations you pile on, they just slow things down. I've worked with unions a lot. You know, I mean, I think you should have the right to join a union if you want, but from what I've seen, it just enables complacency and laziness and slows companies down. It doesn't allow them to get rid of someone who's really not a good asset and doesn't work hard. And I realize that all these things are what's, killing business and making it harder for people to get jobs. And the more requirements they add on to, for training to get certain positions, in their mind, it's like preparing us more or something, but you really don't need all this stuff. All it's doing is slowing us down.
Yeah. Yeah, I know
Yeah.
what you mean. I mean, it's like, but there's some who've talked about the history of the unions, and some of the actual reasons for the unions forming were racially motivated.
Yeah.
They were very anti-immigrant. They didn't like the fact that people were undercutting the cost of the trades. So they came up with these unions to try to stifle the amount of competition that they had to deal with price wise, and they'll still limit the amount of people they'll let into the union to try to keep supply low enough that they can charge high prices for the work that gets done.
Right.
I know how to cut wires, I know how to splice wires. I never joined a union, but
Oh.
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of people, or we hear this every year, like the Libertarian nominee almost always said that most Americans are libertarians. They just don't know it yet. I think there's some truth to that. I think we've been historically really bad at explaining what we envision as a good form of government, good set of rules, because people do think of us as complete anarchists and that everything goes. But at least what I think is I just want the federal government to let the states decide how they want to run themselves, and then I want the states to let each town decide how to run themselves. I think the federal government should enforce the Constitution. It shouldn't let slavery or it shouldn't let murder be allowed, or like it should step in and make sure the states are keeping in line with the Constitution, and then the states should have their own form of government, and then each town should be allowed to deal with its own constituents the way that the constituents see fit. And if you want to have a community in which you all share your income, or if you want to have a town that has some sort of single payer healthcare, or a state that has that, like I think that's fine if you guys really vote on that and that's what you want to do, as long as you're not violating anyone's rights and it's completely voluntary. We don't have anything against people living the way they want. We don't think they all have to live like rugged capitalists like we want to. We just want it to be voluntary, and we want people to make their own decisions. Is that how you feel? You think that's accurate? Or
When I think of capitalism, I think of the need for each of us to contribute to society in some way, and the ability of society to place some value on that. I'm a truck driver. I drive food around from one part of the country to the other. There's a lot of people who are really dependent on that because they don't know how to produce food for themselves. And if I was to take it a step further, maybe the ideal libertarian society, we are not dependent on truck drivers to bring in food from someplace else. We learn how to feed ourselves, how to be individualists, and have a basement full of food that we grew ourselves. And those are concepts I toy with, and I say, maybe what this whole society has built for us has been led astray for a very long time. Even going back to the Industrial Revolution, where rules were passed that let these these new industries that were being formed be able to bypass some laws in order to grow and take over. And now you get it,
Yeah.
there's a slippery slope there with antitrust and some of the things that happened back around the 20s with I forget who the president
Yeah.
was.
It's Teddy Roosevelt, wasn't it? Or
That's the
before
one
was
who
he? Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So you look at some of the history of it, and that's where I find guys like Thomas Woods fascinating, because he has a really interesting take on he has a really interesting ability to bring on some interesting guests and talk about history and things that happened in the 1920s and the 1930s,
Yeah.
and how all those
Mhm.
those decisions that were made back then have repercussions today that we don't even realize. But unless you've been
Yeah.
given that perspective on history, because I took history in high school. I hated it. I really
Mhm.
absolutely hated every minute of it, because it was just going down through the outline and coming up having to write about something that happened a long time ago that you didn't really understand the context of. But
Right.
if Tom Woods was my teacher, maybe I would have been a little more interested. Who knows?
Yeah. So I want to ask you a little bit about antitrust laws, what you think about that idea in general. And I had a guy on earlier today, Zach, and he and I were talking about social media and what's going on with that whole thing. They're kind of, some people want to break up the big tech companies. Some people want to remove their protections completely. Most people haven't read the law. That's why they're making all these things. But some people also want to just rewrite the law so that there is a clear distinction between a platform and a publisher. Do you think that, first of all, do you think antitrust laws in their general purpose are something that is needed if you really have a free market just to keep things from monopolizing? And then do you think that that is a valid argument for social media? Do you think the government should either remove some remove some protections or regulate them or break them up? Or do you think there's a market solution to all of them, including social media? What are your thoughts on all that?
Well, it's hard for me to say, because what you know I'm I've been following Facebook, Google, these major companies for a while now, just by interest of, oh, this is what's going on. And it wasn't just a few years ago when they were not before social media really took hold. And I remember when Facebook started their advertising program, and people were speculating whether or not they'd actually be able to monetize it, right before they became a publicly traded company. And
Right.
then all of a sudden, once they started to get this cash flow, they started just buying up their competition and buying all these other companies, because they came up with this algorithm and it worked. And you know
Mhm.
I, in many ways, I wonder if I like the book from 2006, 2007 better than the Facebook we have today, because it was a little more free. It was more, you were able to have a platform, and everything wasn't mashed through this algorithm. And you know you're, instead of being able to reach as many people on your friends list as you want, they suddenly filter it down so you can reach 5 people at a time. And then if you want to pay them extra, they will open it up, to
Mhm.
a number of people. So, I mean, I'm not really dodging the question, and I'm not really answering it either, but it's hard for me to say how the government has a role to play in all this. The real
Uh-huh.
question when it comes to antitrust is, you have to evaluate how these barriers to entry for their competition came into play. I think you know, when I think of antitrust, I think of other situations like, take a company like Monsanto, who has single-handedly bought up almost every seed producer in the country. You know, they don't just own the pesticide market, they also own the seed market as well, because of all these genetically modified seeds that they got involved with. And they got really aggressive into buying all these other seed companies because, you know, they had the cash flow, they had the access to capital. And, you know, I start to think about, okay, why are we so dependent on another company? Why are farmers dependent on a company to tell them what seeds to plant, what, you know, when, what harvest, you know, there's some real disconnect there that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, you know. And I went to college for farming, so I'm not a newbie by any stretch of the imagination. It just seems like everything that has developed in agrochemical world seems antithetical to reason to me. And you know, that's why I'm interested in organic agriculture, because it seems to be based a little more on science and not about what spray or pesticide or understand, you know, it's all more about understanding the life cycles of creatures and things along those lines, and how to develop resilience. And, you know, there's some really interesting things I've learned, like, you know, weeds that grow can tell you a lot about mineral deficiencies in the soil. And if all you're spraying them all the time, you're never addressing those deficiencies because you don't know about them. You don't understand why you keep getting velvet leaf growing or whatever. So I feel like I strayed off.
So do you think, yeah, it's a little bit, but it's all right. The idea of like getting back to that more decentralized economy, does the government need to help us get there? Or do you think it's just through deregulation and letting the small businesses have an even playing field? Do you think it'll just naturally occur? Or does the government have to initially do something to get us on that track? Do they need to break up corporations or you know, unlicensed monopolies, or what do you think they need to do, if not just get out of the way and let it happen?
I think one has to look at what laws are these corporations and their lobbyists have put on books, and maybe address whether or not those laws are valid. You know what I mean? Because I'm sure the government played a role in stifling the competition and making it difficult for a small business to come in. And I mean, like, I remember stories about because of the way there was a Supreme Court decision that stated that the genetic material that Monsanto sells through their seeds is proprietary. So if their pollen goes and pollinates your corn that you're saving seeds from, and you plant it the following year, and Monsanto came onto your farm, ran a genetics test on your corn, and found their proprietary genetics, somehow you were liable for stealing their genetics. And there's something really, really screwy about that whole scenario right there.
Yeah.
You know, I think that there's some opportunities to talk about, okay, how were these oligopolies created? You know, one really should dig into that and discover, oh, it was this Supreme Court decision, blah, 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 you know. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because I think that, yeah, it's hard because if everything was starting out at a level playing field, then I think there's like no arguments against a free market idea. The problem is like right now we've been so screwed over, and then with everything that's going on with the coronavirus, with all the corporations getting all the bailouts, and then the people getting laid off, a lot of them are unlikely to even get their jobs back. Some of those jobs are just gone, they're saying.
Million jobs,
Trillions.
on unemployment.
Yeah. So because the government screwed us over so bad, and they've been screwing us over so bad, I can at least understand an argument for they owe us something to give us a head start again. I, I understand that argument and I have sympathy for it. My problem with it is I just do not trust them to do it. I mean, at this point, they have just made it so obvious that they're completely incapable. I remember when this first thing came out, there was talks like Tulsi Gabbard and Justin Amash and even Mitt Romney or something, like they were talking about, doing some direct cash payments to citizens. And when that idea first came out, I was like, okay, well, if they pull the troops out of Afghanistan, if they, shut down certain parts of the government we don't need, if they can somehow balance this, like, yeah, it makes sense because it would help everybody. They have proven that they cannot do that. They deserve absolutely no authority with anything anymore. So I'm pretty much at the point where I'm just good with the government getting out of the way and just having it stop, screw everything up. What do you think about all that? In an idealistic situation, do you think the government should reimburse us a little? Do you think it's possible they could do that, or do you think that's just a dumb argument anyway? Or
Well, the argument for universal basic income, which I have mixed feelings about, was always that, it would be more efficient to send everyone a check than it would be to do the means tested, convoluted welfare system that we are currently dealing with. Because, there are so many social workers that are on the payroll just who go through and weed through applications and meet with candidates and all this other stuff. And, it's like the argument about healthcare. The reason why healthcare has become so expensive is because there are so many people cutting a paycheck from your healthcare dollar who are not doctors.
mm-hmm.
Between the insurance industry and all of the bureaucrats that handle, who gets the money and where does it go and all these other things. So you start to think about, maybe things have become a little too convoluted. Maybe we need to find a way to simplify it and open up free markets and allow competition to come in and say, hey, my hospital is cheaper. I can give you an MRI for half the price.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, at this point, that's probably just the best solution going forward is, I mean, the government's just completely proven itself absolutely inept. Even though they've just completely screwed us over, it's almost like the wars in the Middle East at this point. Like, just because you started something doesn't mean you should finish it when it's just continuously driving you into the ground. I feel like that with social programs and the government bailing the people out. Like at this point, they've just made so many mistakes. The idea of winning with the government is just kind of dead. It's like, okay, at some point you just have to cut ties and be like, all right, this isn't working. We just need to, start over.
Right. Yeah. It's so hard to say because, I don't know, if we actually got the opportunity to take over and got the opportunity to lead even a little bit, how long until Like, just say Ron Paul won in 2012. How long the Democrats and the Republicans in Congress banded together to get him impeached because he brought all the troops home recklessly, ending our conflicts overseas. I start to wonder about that. Is this train that we can't get off of? We might be able to slow the train down, but at the very least, some of these numbers are very insurmountable. The idea that we could ever have a balanced budget again, where the government doesn't spend more than it takes in, that would be an interesting first step. But ideally, we wouldn't have all of everything falling under the purview of the federal government. It would be left to the state. But I'm from New York State, and I'm sick and tired of half the things that my state government tries to push on us. They've made it really hard for local businesses to just bring up. The only way that projects get started is if they are able to cut pilot deals with the state, because they say, oh, we're going to have all this tax revenue from our future sales, so you should give us a payment in lieu of taxes deal. And it's like, wait a minute, I don't have one of those. How do I get a payment in taxes? How do I get a $500,000 grant to start a business? It's all about political connections, and it really just goes to the heart of, where does all this power come from? Why do the people in Albany, New York, have the power to say who gets to start their own business and who gets to succeed, and who's related to who and what political connections there are? It's just
So this is going to be a bit of a crazy question, but libertarians are really big on the Second Amendment, and they take it like a little bit farther than the Republicans do. Republicans, are kind of like, well, it's for self-defense. The Democrats think it's for hunting rabbits. The Libertarians think it's for resisting the government, and when you've had enough, that they have to listen to you. So my question is, I feel like right now, things are way worse than they were when we fought the Revolutionary War, as far as taxation without representation, paying debts for reckless wars. And right now, who runs the country? It's pretty much Nancy Pelosi, Mitch McConnell, and Donald Trump. We got like three people running the entire legislative process. So my question is, at what point, when you can't do anything through voting, like you said, even if we got somebody in, like how long would they be able to handle it? When do you, when do you rise up and say, okay, this is it? There's a lot of energy for it in a lot of different political arenas, not just the Libertarian Party. Like the far left also feels this way. And then a lot of people in the middle are just fed up. I don't know if they're thinking about an armed rebellion or anything, but like, how bad would things have to get before that actually got serious? Like, I personally don't think we're there yet, but with everything that's going on, it doesn't seem like impossible anymore in the near future.
It's hard for me to say, because, the whole idea, I think Stefan Molyneux has talked about this a lot, how the idea that, we should be able to win people over with our words, with our reason, with our appeal to people's, free ability to speak and think freely and form their own opinions, and allow us to kind of sort ourselves out that way, rather than, when you oppress the people by limiting their ability to talk about certain topics, that's when violence becomes the only means to be heard. So I really can avoid running into American Revolution #2 because I don't know who all's going to survive that. For some reason, the government has bigger tanks and bigger guns than we have, and have a great number.
Yeah.
But I do believe that we should be allowed to defend ourselves, and I think it's important that the founders of this country realized that, and that is why they use the terms like a regular militia. This is there was a time when local militias would be called upon to suppress the Indian uprising or whatever would happen back in the 16 and 17. So, but I don't know. I lost my
hopefully it doesn't come to that. But yeah, we're kind of running out of time here, but thanks for coming on again, Mike, and we'll have you back. I'll just give you the last word if there's anything else you want to say. And
no, I think I really am hopeful that Joe Jorgensen is gonna be able to really give these libertarians something to rally behind, and hopefully we'll be able to grow the party. So that's my hope for the future. We'll see what happens, but that's my hope.
All right, Mike, we'll catch you next time. Thanks for coming on.
All right, sounds good, man.